Welcome to TangibleTalks podcast. In today's episode, we continue our series on attitudes by exploring the topic of toxic attitudes. In this episode, we'll discuss how toxic attitudes negatively impact both the individuals who hold them and those around them.
Our attitude determines so much about our success and spiritual growth. Our attitude is something we have control of if we realize it. Who wants to be called toxic or have a toxic attitude? And yet, we probably suffer from symptoms of a toxic attitude.
A toxic attitude can be defined as a harmful or negative behavior that can negatively impact others and oneself. Words used to describe a toxic attitude are manipulation, excessive criticism, selfishness, disrespect, gaslighting, murmuring, grumbling, and includes causing people to rebel against authority.
What are examples of toxic attitude in Scripture? What are the results of toxic attitudes in our lives? How do we recognize the toxicity in ourselves and in relationships?
Join us as we discuss toxic attitudes on TangibleTalks podcast.
Hi, Jana.
Hey, Rita. Hey, listeners.
Hello, everybody.
It's been a day.
It's been a day.
It took us a long time to get that intro.
It did. It did.
Just a little behind the scenes for you guys. We're persevering. We're pushing through.
It can be a challenge sometimes, but you gotta push through. Sometimes it's difficult, and you gotta keep a good attitude.
I think that's easier when this is something I do. I don't know if it's a good thing, but it helps me. When I set my expectation to just thinking it's going to happen, then I don't get upset by it actually happening. Like with the podcasting, for example, I just have come to expect that we will have issues.
Yeah, we're going to have to start a couple of times.
I'm not as disappointed when we run into issues.
Yeah. Dennis Prager had something very similar to say about people. He said, I expect people to disappoint me. I am pleasantly surprised when they don't.
Mm.
People are going to disappoint us, but we seem to always be surprised by it, and it just kind of ruins our day. When no, we're dealing with people that are made of dust and are struggling just like you are, and it shouldn't surprise us that we're going to be disappointed. But what should surprise us is when everything goes well. That's when we should
and then we should relish in those moments when they do.
Yeah. Another one of his quotes is, complaining not only ruins everybody else's day, it ruins the complainer's day too. Mm-hmm. The more we complain, the more unhappy we get. The more we complain, the more unhappy we get. We got a lot of unhappy people around us.
Yeah. And it can spiral. Like, I know somebody can ask me a question about something that didn't go well, or they'll ask me, my take on something that I don't really like. I unintentionally can just go down this spiral of I'll start talking about it, and then it gets really it actually happened this morning where one of my friends asked me about something that had happened recently, and it just went and I saw it in myself, and I was trying to spiral back out of it. And I even told her, I said, oh my goodness, I can tell that I'm really snippy. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be venting. Let me reel that back in a little bit.
Also, the more you expect, the less happy you will be.
Well, and that was the root of my issue with this deal, is I had an expectation that, maybe I shouldn't have had. And when it didn't meet that expectation, then it caused me to be unhappy, even though I was perfectly fine before.
But, if you expect too much, then my neighbor's going by.
Yeah, I hear it.
You hear it? Yeah.
I heard it, yeah.
When we finally got the microphones and everything to work, he cranked up his car and read the engine. So, I'm just I'm going to laugh about it. I'm not going to let it get me. We have that choice. In the intro, I think I said that I our attitude is something we have control of. Sometimes you might need to walk away.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you may just need to laugh because we're all, it makes such a big difference. It makes a difference. Complaining, grumbling, murmuring, gaslighting, all of these phrases. I mean, we probably don't have enough of them, which is kind of sad. But I don't want to sit around and come up with words that would fall into that category. After we do this episode, our next episode is going to be called Attitude Adjustments. Looking for the good things, looking for things that will adjust our attitude and keep us from having these toxic attitudes. And I want to tell you the material came much faster in these toxic attitudes than it did in the other. What does that say about me? What does it say? So, diving into toxic attitudes, I had written a note of some things I've heard myself say and I've heard other people say to me. And it's, your attitude is killing me. I think there's a whole lot of truth in that. Your attitude is killing me. And my attitude has been really hard for some people and vice versa. And it's become a little catchphrase in our society. Their attitude's killing me. The woulda, coulda, should'ves. That'll start you down a slippery slope. Well, if you would have, then I could have, and you should have. We need to recognize that that's toxic. How many people are going to come up to you and say, hey, I just bought some new Clorox. It smells like lemons. Want a sip? Who in their right mind would do that? Why do we allow these toxic things in us to come out and spill over on other people? We know better. We know better. So what's the issue? Is it a habit? Have we gotten into such a blaming, toxic society that it's just part of the game and we don't see the repercussions?
I mean, I definitely think it's a part of the culture. I literally don't even listen or watch the news because I can't, because it's just a constant blame game. And it's so negative. The speech is so negative that it's just awful.
Yeah, I don't listen to the news either. And when they come up and they want to show highlights of people behaving badly,
Yeah.
I turn it off because I do not want the numbers to go up on that, because I don't want you to show me that. Even with a YouTube or something like that, I immediately turn it off at that point because I don't want those numbers. I don't want any kind of reward to come from that.
And I definitely, that's a big part of social media on TikTok and, like you said, YouTube and Instagram Reels. I mean, there's a lot of content around negativity. And there's even content around like judging other people's content in a negative manner, which is really wild to me. But
Oh, isn't it? Well, imagine that the Bible has something to say about toxicity and a
cancel
toxic attitude.
culture. That seems, that's a term that we use right now, because it's like,
well, you
we
use
really
it more than I
want to
do.
cancel people right now.
Yeah. But the topic of this is toxic attitudes. And so we're kind of highlighting on the ones that we should really watch out for. And Ephesians 4:31 says, never to be bitter, angry, mad, or shout angrily.
Yeah, and this kind of makes me always think back to the verse about it's not what you put in that defiles a person, it's what comes out.
Mm-hmm.
That really talks about the state of your heart, and we went into that in depth in the Heart series, which is still one of my favorite series we've done to date. If we have any new listeners who haven't listened to that series, I would encourage you to go back. I got a lot out of that one.
I did
but
too.
yeah, when we're saying things in a bitter, angry, I know this is something that I used to really, really struggle with. I had a really, really short temper. Like it would just, again, like Jordan used to kind of call it a firecracker temper. And I think I really started working on it mostly when I became a parent because I didn't want that to be a part of my parenting. Like I didn't want that to be a part of JoJo's life. And so again, it's a practice because it's not something that comes natural to me. I was not like born with a tremendous amount of patience. It is a practice. But when things bother me or I'm starting to feel angry, I think it's so important to remember that we are the ones in control of our body and our mind and what we say and how things make us feel and how we react to those situations. And when you really understand that, I think that gives you one responsibility over your actions, which again is another issue that I used to really struggle with is taking responsibility for my actions. Nothing was ever my fault. And so it's just nothing good is going to be produced from shouting and blowing up on somebody. And so you really have to take that deep breath and think about, why is this making me angry? And sometimes people aren't the best at giving you that time you need. And like you said, you might just need to walk away.
Yeah.
And expressing that in a way, like with Jordan, for example, he always likes to talk it out. Like that was always his thing. We got to talk it out. And I'm not always in the mood to talk it out because it is a struggle for me. And so now, like through years of experience, I will sometimes tell him, this really bothered me. I'm going to need a minute to go think about how to express it in a better way. And
Oh,
I think he appreciates that because he used to, I would have just gone off on him.
well, the household that I grew up in, everyone yelled.
Yeah.
We yelled,
Well, I think
and
we view it
that's
as a
what you
sense
get
of
used
power.
to. Mm.
It's
Yeah.
strength. When you're strong, you're overpower, you overtake people. I mean, that is the way of the world. Like we think about even the disciples when Jesus came, they envisioned a very different king than what Jesus really was. I think that they viewed him as he was going to be the king to ride in and grant power and be strong and reign with power, and that's not it. And that's not what we're called to do, but it's very counter cultural to the flesh and to the world. And that's why it's a practice. That's why it's tough.
And he is powerful, but his power is not displayed in what we view as powerful.
Exactly.
We have the wrong opinion of it. And so he came to be the living example of what power really looks like.
Mm-hmm.
What what are the most powerful things? Love, kindness, all those things, not anything that we continue to see or continue to think is power. Murmuring, that may be an old word, and some people may not, get what murmuring and grumbling is. It's when you're in the workplace and your boss comes in and says, "Look, I need you guys to get here on time. We've got this project that we've got to work on." And then they walk away and you go, "Yeah, well, you don't get here either. Must
Yeah.
be nice to be able to come in anytime you want to come in." That's a murmuring and a grumbling. And it's toxic because then you're wanting somebody else to jump in on and go, "Yeah, I know. I watched, and they took a 2-hour lunch meeting last week. They've gone 2 hours." Well, and then now you've got this attitude going around, and you're spending all your time grumbling and complaining, and you don't have time to do what really needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
That's the murmuring and grumbling, and that was prevalent in the Israelites, and they did not enter in. It's toxic speech. It's inciting rebellion.
And I think that you see that a lot with the Pharisees and the Sadducees too.
Oh, yes.
Like they just constantly murmured and grumbled and complained because Jesus came in and was showing them a different way, the way. And well, they didn't like it because it was changed.
And Jesus couldn't speak directly to them,
Mm,
because if he spoke directly to them and said, "Look, you've got a problem with this, this, and that," he couldn't do it. So he had to speak in parables. He couldn't. The best thing he could do is get them to catch it, because their attitudes were so out of whack.
mm.
It's out of whack. It's not in line. It's toxic. It's not really good. You probably shouldn't do that. No, it's toxic. Toxic generally is associated with something that brings death.
Mhm.
For the Israelites, it brought them death. They died in the wilderness. They didn't get out of where they were. They remained in it because they continued to practice this attitude. Are you unhappy where you are? Well, what's your attitude like? Are you grumbling against your husband? Are you grumbling against your boss? Murmuring? Are you grumbling about your pastor? You leave church, you get in the car, your whole family's there, and you go, I just don't know. He has all week to prepare, and he didn't say anything that touched me.
Yeah. Are you open-minded enough to allow it to? And sometimes you will find yourself in situations like I was with the education system. I was fed up with it and everything that I view as just very backwards about it. And so I found myself in a position where I kept complaining and grumbling and just being really bothered by it because I felt like there wasn't really anything I could do about it. And so I was just stuck in this stagnant situation that, yes, I still tried to make the best of it for the kids because I knew it was important. But I was just so irritated on the other side of it with all the red tape aspect of it.
How did that
And
um,
I
how did
needed
that
to
affect your
leave.
strength? Yeah, how did that affect you physically and when you went home?
Yeah, well, it was making me come home and I was so worn out because I was constantly fighting this battle with just the system, and then I needed to be there for the kids, so it was like I was trying to play this. I felt like I was acting all the
Mm,
time because I was just constantly trying to set a positive example for the kids, even though I was so unhappy and didn't believe in a lot of the things we were doing. And so it was just a constant show. It's like I was just putting on show after show after show, trying to be there, trying to tell them, teach them things that are important that they will need, and then also trying to buy into all this system that I totally disagreed with. And I would come home just completely worn out, and I couldn't be there for my family. Like they were getting the worst version of me. And that wasn't okay. I wasn't okay with it. And that's why I had to find something different, even though I really struggled with that. I felt really guilty because I knew the work was important. And I still think that teaching is like, I'm so thankful for all of the wonderful teachers out there, that especially if you're listening and you're a teacher, like, God bless you. I'm so thankful that we have you out there in the world trying to make a difference. But it had gotten to where I couldn't be in that space anymore
how
because
did the parents
I wasn't it wasn't producing the fruits in my life that I wanted to be producing, and especially not for my family. And so instead of staying stuck there, like several other people who I know are still in teaching and they still hate it and they're still complaining about it. I had to get out. I had to find a different path.
mm,
And I think that we have to do that when we are stuck in that cycle. When something is really bothering us, staying there in that situation is the absolute worst thing you can do because it's just going to continue to breed all of that negative energy and all of that negative mindset that doesn't produce good fruits.
And so I have two questions. One, what were the parents like, or the atmosphere around the students? And how long did it take you to get to realize you weren't in a good situation and change that and get into a different situation?
So the discipline part of the school or of the situation was one element to what did make teaching really difficult and made me complain. I didn't have a ton of interaction with a lot of the parents. If I feel like most of the time, the ones that responded or reached back out, it was more because they were concerned about their kid and their kid did really well anyway. Like a lot of times the apathetic students that I had, I think a lot of it they didn't have a lot of parent involvement in their life, which is why they had gotten to that point. So I taught high schoolers. And so if you're having a lot of these issues and behaviors, and then the students would often talk to me about their parents. And so I knew that they weren't necessarily a great sounding board anyways. But really the biggest issues I had that made me dislike teaching so much is I taught math, which is a tested subject. And in Tennessee, particularly, like it was, and it may be like this everywhere, all over the country now, but it was just test, 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 test. Those test scores, like, got to get those test scores up. Da, 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 da. And that was just what it was so focused on that I didn't feel like that was helping the kids actually learn about math and how to apply math in their lives. And that's what I really wanted to focus on. And if I could go back, that's what I would focus on, because I think that makes a bigger impact anyways. And I didn't see the benefit to skill and drill and prep these kids to stress them out. Like, I don't think there's a lot of benefit there. I would just do what I wanted to do anyways. And not worry a lot about their gimmicks, because their gimmicks just didn't work. They were a waste of time. And so the bigger issue really of why I was so frustrated was that I felt like I didn't have control over creative content and really teaching them and spending the time on what they needed to learn, especially coming off of COVID. I had students in algebra who were so far behind, and all they wanted was, well, you need to be doing these skills because these are the algebra skills. Well, they didn't have the pre-algebra skills. Math builds on itself. So when if you don't know how to add and subtract integers, you sure don't know how to add and subtract polynomials. And so there was just the goals and objectives were so skewed on the way that in my mind it should have been. So that was really more my issue even than the students and the discipline. Like, that was a very challenging part, but the systemic issue really overtook that. How long did it take me to get out of it? I started back teaching right after the COVID year, which was probably worse than normal too, to be fair. After I had been there about 2 months, I knew it was time to go, because I saw that it really didn't matter how creative I got with a lesson plan, how interactive, how engaging, like the games, it just didn't matter. They just wanted to be glued to their phones. I had to be responsible for their phones if I took them. It was just such a headache. But I was there about 2 months and I realized it was time to go. And so I started exploring different options for jobs that I could do based on my education and my interests. And that's when I found analytics, and I was like, I'm just going to roll with it, and started grad school a month after that and ran with it.
Yeah. Sometimes when we get to the point that we just almost feel hopeless in a situation, that turns out to be a sign that maybe a door is opening and you need to go a different way. And I'm sure there's some people that are listening that go, look, I'm in debt. I can't quit. I have to stay in this.
Yes,
And
and I
in your
think you bring up a really good point there, and I think that wasn't an element of my story because we had already worked for years to get out of debt by that point. Um, but I do think that sometimes we can feel overwhelmed, and I felt overwhelmed. I mean, the fact that I had to go back, work on a master's while working full time, that was not easy. And I think that so many times we just look for the easy option
yes.
instead of looking for a better option that, yeah, it might
Mhm.
be, you're probably going to experience some discomfort.
So this toxicity would drain your strength.
Hmm.
It would prevent you from having patience when dealing with those that are around you and loving. And it perpetuates just this darkness. And in our next series, we're going to talk about attitude adjustments and how can you break this cycle? What are some ways that we can adjust this? And with it, will just as the negative brings darkness and all this toxic stuff, changing it will bring light and will bring good. And we need to be aware that in this toxic place, it is going to do nothing but grow and breed toxic toxicity in our lives. You mentioned something when talking about the students, and I see this a lot. And my mother, this was probably the greatest abuse in her early childhood, and it's neglect, and it's
Hmm.
failure to care for properly, to give little attention or respect to disregard it. And it's just like you're nothing. Here, take this phone and get out of my face. I don't want to talk to you about that right now. I've had a busy day. Just go and get on your computer and do whatever. It's
Yeah.
neglect. And
And that's what they know. And I
and
mean,
that's what they
I
know.
think being in the schools and seeing that, it's such a telltale sign of that's a norm. I mean, it's a learned behavior.
For my mother, since she had no one give her attention, when someone showed her attention,
Mm,
she had been so neglected that she fell for someone that misused her. If no one's shown you attention, then someone who's got an agenda and it's not a really good agenda, they know to look for this. And their first words, you're so beautiful, you're so this, you're so that. And when you're starved for attention, you'll fall for anything.
mm,
And that is something that neglect will build in our lives. I don't know if we got off topic or not, but it needed to be said.
yeah.
I believe it needed to be said. Um, I want to cover some more scripture that talks about things that we should be careful and see what can happen with these. Maybe neglect was one of those, and I just never looked for it. Proverbs 22:24 and 25. It says, don't be friends with people who become angry easily.
Mm,
Don't stay around quick tempered people. So, people who become easily angered and are quick temper could be considered toxic. And you know what? We probably all already know that naturally.
yeah.
Do we really need someone to say, you probably shouldn't be around them? They just get angry all the time. They're going to hit you. That's,
Well, it's not fun to be around. It puts you on eggshells because you never know what you're going to say that might set them off.
and because of the fear of their anger, they control you.
Mm,
You can't be yourself. You're afraid to say something, you're afraid to do something, and it builds so much anxiety and stress in your life, and we know those things affect your health. So Proverbs, which is wisdom, tells us don't be friends with people who become angry easily. It's very simple English. Don't do it. And Scripture is telling us how to live a good, happy, productive life. Then Romans 12:14 says, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. We are not to treat others badly. And if someone is doing the opposite of this, they don't believe in the same God you believe in.
Mm.
If they're persecuting you and they're cursing you, and man, if they don't rejoice with you when something good
Yes.
happens to you, they are not your friend.
I think that's a big one, especially for our young listeners. That's definitely something I know I will talk about with JoJo. If you have a friend or somebody in your life who is not excited about the successes of your life, they are not your friend.
They're not your
They're
friend.
not your friend.
It's that simple. It is not rocket science. It really isn't. God gives us very simple instruction. But why can't you walk away from them? What is it? What is going on there? Think about this. Think about this. Then Matthew 5:39 through 41. But I say to you, do not resist the evildoer. But whoever strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him as well. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, give him also your coat. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Now this is when Jesus says, now you've heard an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now this doesn't sound very good. And let me tell you, you've got to get to a major maturity level to do this. But this is how the fruits of the Spirit in your life, by not paying them back and doing exactly what they do, and by not grumbling and complaining, but showing perseverance, that will affect their life. Your patience, your love, the love of God coming out in you will change their life. And it will not allow a toxic attitude to dwell in you. Now, I think this is deep. I think you've got to really look at it and practice it. Do not do the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because all you do is you have a bunch of blind, toothless people running around. That's kind of funny, and it's good because sugar helps the medicine go down. And so look at the life of Jesus. Look at how he dealt with those who persecuted him. You can't
Yeah, he
become their
never
friend.
persecuted anyone else.
Yes. You can't become their friend, but you cannot say, well, you did that, so I'm going to do that. You got to stop that attitude.
The revenge.
The revenge. God will deal with it if you will trust him. Hey, it's a heart thing. If they're not faithful to you, they're evil, they persecute you, what you're doing is you're seeing their heart. How you react to it reveals your heart. They're not faithful, but don't become unfaithful because they are.
Yeah. And I think I know from my experience, one of the best things you can do for those people in your life is to pray for them.
Yes.
Like I can think of, there have been a couple of people in my life who I really had a hard time with. And when I started to pray for them over time, my heart towards them changed. And I don't know that I can fully explain it. But it just did.
I was at a place in my life where I had someone that was very close to me betray me. And it rocked my world. And I knew enough to know that I needed to forgive them, but I also was real and went, I can't do this. And I made a list of all the things that they had done. And I took that note and I ripped it up and I threw it in the garbage. And I said, God, unless you rip this out of my heart, unless you show me how to do this, all I did was throw a piece of paper away. And it will not make a difference at all except for the amount of trash. But I do that as a symbol. I'm asking you to rip up my memory and my bitterness of this and get it out of my heart. And the next day, nothing had changed. The next week, it didn't come to my mind as often. And over time, and I can't even tell you how long it took. After a while, I couldn't remember. And now I would have a really difficult time telling you what was on that list.
Mm.
And it was slowly replacing the memory of what they did with something else. I wanted to take that list and I wanted to proclaim it to everybody. But I knew it wouldn't do any good. And so walking it out made a change in me. Matthew tells us that Matthew 5 warns us that those behaviors of hitting and harming and stealing and forcing hardships on others because we're trying to be the judge, there's not good things that come with that.
Yeah, blasting others on social
Mm-hmm.
media, that's a big one. That was one
Yeah.
of the reasons I got off of Facebook, is because it just became this place where people just aired out all their dirty laundry, and like
Yeah.
that is not the purpose of social media. And
I had to unfriend someone that I've known since junior high because of the posts and the stuff that was coming through my feed. And I told him, I
yeah.
said, I love you, but I just can't deal with this negativity and stuff. I love you. Bye. And I didn't have to tell him. And I didn't go in there and go, you need to stop and you don't know what you're
Yeah.
talking about, and do the arguments. Nothing comes good.
The judgy
Yeah,
thing.
the judgy thing. I didn't want to slander. I didn't want to be argumentative. We've got to watch this toxic attitude. And you may need to just delete your account. If that's what it takes, then that's what it takes. I think that's where it talks about plucking out your eye and cutting off your arm. That's extreme. God's not wanting you to do that, but he's just trying to get your attention and say, look, just close your Facebook. Don't go on YouTube. Don't listen to the news. Cut it off.
Yeah, I think if you notice that these things aren't building good habits or good behaviors in you, then that's a telltale sign of it's time to stop it. For example, me with the Facebook, it wasn't doing me any good. I wasn't really gaining any benefit from that. It didn't make me feel better. It wasn't. It was just time to let it go, because it was breeding bad behaviors and bad fruits in my life. Because I mean, while I disagree with it, sometimes those things can be juicy. You know, there's another saying, spilling the tea, the gossip. I mean, it there's a reason why all of this exists so much in our TV and all those things, is because people buy into it. It's interesting, but we know that it's wrong, and we know that it doesn't bear good fruits. And so those need to be things that we actively stay away from and choose not to partake in, because they ultimately will not lead to good things in our
No,
lives.
they're toxic.
They're toxic.
They're toxic. And 1 Corinthians 15:33 and 34. Do not be deceived. That means, don't be fooled. Pay attention to this. Do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. Not good morals corrupt bad company. No, bad company corrupts good morals. Sober up as you should and stop sinning, for some have no knowledge of God. And I say this to your shame. Now he's writing to the Corinthians, and he's getting on to them. Sober doesn't necessarily mean that you're drinking too much. It could, but it could be that you're just not paying attention.
Mm.
You're blind to it. Sober up, wake up, don't be deceived. Don't be deceived. And because toxic attitudes bring about death. Slowly, it affects your health, it affects your family, there will be decay, there will be decline. And then another one is what you mentioned just a while ago. Gossip.
Mm-hmm.
Remember what happened in the Garden of Eden? If you eat the apple, you will know good and evil. We want to know. And most of the time, we want to know the bad stuff and not necessarily good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It started in the Garden of Eden, and it pretty much hasn't ended, to our shame. Proverbs 16:28. A perverse person spreads dissension, and a gossip separates the closest friends. A gossip separates the closest friends.
And there is something, I think, about human nature that this is an element of, because I think we have a natural tendency to want to kind of pair off and create someone who isn't a part of the group. And you'll see this in TV shows like The Bachelor. They always villainize a character on that cast. And at first I always thought that was just kind of written into the script, but I saw this a lot in schools, and when I was in school too, it's like you kind of want to have an outcast because it makes everybody else feel included, like you're a part of something.
Well,
And so
it's
I
the
think,
opposite of what we were created for. We were created for community. And so if we're living where the enemy's coming in, then he's gonna divide. God multiplies. The enemy
yeah,
divides
yeah.
in all things.
And I think gossip is a big part of that. Is people come together and gossip about somebody else because it makes them feel closer to the person they're gossiping with. Like there's an insider secret. I don't know. That's just how I think some of the psychology works around that.
Yeah. It's toxic.
It's
We keep
toxic, and
repeating that.
it's a really, really negative thing, you know?
Yeah. Do not continue with these toxic attitudes, this mindset, these things. It brings negativity. And Proverbs 22:10 says, drive out a scoffer, and strife will go out, and quarreling and abuse will cease. And a scoffer is, they talk all kinds of negative stuff. By just stopping that, strife goes out the door, quarreling and abuse cease.
Yeah, and I've seen this play out. So if I'm around somebody and I'm not going to say I do this every time. I'm not saying that I'm perfect and almighty, and I have gossiped many a times. I have gotten in on the tea. Like I am not perfect. I just want to make sure that I'm not putting on this holier than that. I'm not. But I have seen this play out where somebody starts to talk negatively about somebody, and then if you just sprinkle in a little bit of, well, they're going through this, or say something nice about them, and you just kind of wash it out, then that other person who was going to start gossiping, they change their tune
Look
and
at
they
what
don't go
Jesus
down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, look at what Jesus did when the person came and said, I went to your disciples and they couldn't cast out this spirit. And Jesus' reply was, this kind only comes out through prayer and fasting. His disciples came to him and said, why couldn't we do it? He said, this can only come out through prayer and fasting. It wasn't, that's because you guys don't know what you're doing. I'm really
You don't
tired
have
of
the faith.
messing
Yeah.
with you, and blah, blah, blah. And if you hadn't have been over there at someone's house, or if you hadn't have gone to that party and spent more time, It wasn't. He just got right to the point. The Bible really does get right to the point. He shows you, because you get to the point you go, why is my life so hard? Why am I going through these things? Why does it look like I keep fighting the same battles? Why do I always, even when I get a new job, I get into the same situation? Well, what's the common denominator? Have you looked at your attitude? And when you get to the point that you do not, I don't want to live this way, man, that's the best place to be. And God will say, be grateful. And there's some things that you can do to adjust this attitude, and your attitude will determine the goodness and the blessings in your life.
Yeah. And that's what we're going to get into next week.
That's what we're going to get into next week. I'm going to close in prayer. Lord, thank you. Help me to be mindful and grateful for the good things in my life. Help me not to keep a record of wrong of those that are around me. Help me not to keep in my mind and in my heart things that will lead to bitterness and resentment, to where my attitude just smells bad. I don't want my attitude to kill me or those that are around me. Lord, help us to desire more from you, your goodness, your fruits. Thank you for your word. Thank you for your patience and your goodness and your mercy that is always with us. Lord, you do not neglect us. You are faithful. You are just. Your mercy endures forever. Your blessings are new to us every day. If we're going to keep a list of something, let us keep a list of that. Lord, I ask that for me and those that are listening, that you replace our desire or the toxic attitudes in our lives with compassion for those that are suffering, because they are suffering. They are in darkness. They are struggling. It's taking their health, and they have been deceived by darkness and dark forces. And the way that we can fight this is to pray for others and to have compassion and goodness. Help us to be surrounded with friends that when we fall into the gossiping and the grumbling and the murmuring and the backbiting and the complaining, that we have someone around us that goes, you need to stop. What's going on with you? And to replace it with the good things. Lord, thank you that you continue to bless us. Thank you for this podcast. Thank you for those that listen. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.
Amen. Well, once again, we thank you guys for tuning in with us as we are beginning to close out our attitude series. We have one more episode. We're going to change tunes a little bit and talk about attitude adjustments. So going away from all the negative energy, the toxic attitude, and how do we transition and change our behaviors so that we can adjust our attitude. So we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.